I'd like to welcome everybody, both here and at home, to our June 2nd Saturday program here at the Berks History Center. My name is Lisa Minnick, and I am the co-interim director and also the business manager here at Berks History Center. Our speaker this morning is Mr. John Lawlor Jr. John worked for the Reading Conference. His dad, both his grandfathers, two great grandfathers, several uncles. He retired from Reading Area Community College as Professor Emeritus in 2015 after a 25-year teaching career. He served as a resource consultant for several summer institutes at the Library of Congress and continues to consult for and volunteer with the Education Center at the National Archives in Washington. This is not just presenting at BHC, so we warmly welcome him back to present the rescue and preservation of a Philadelphia and Reading Railroad photographic collection. Welcome, John.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Berks County History Center. This is a place I've gone to many times when I was a kid. I'd come up here on a Sunday and just browse around. I was amazed by all the things, and it's nice to be back to give a presentation. The presentation this morning is, well, it's really quite simple. If I can get this going. Yeah, it's a preservation and digitization project. Simple enough. You have a camera, take a picture, develop that picture, and then make a print. The next step is to take that print and the negative, turn it into, an item in a clean envelope, and then store those in a cool place. That's the whole project. Just, repeat for each one that you do. But this will lead you to some of the value of a project like this, to take a look at different histories. Well, I can see by the clock on the bell tower that it's time to go back in time. Some contextualization for history. I don't want to tell you how long it took me to get that clock to run backwards. Talk about a person with too much time in their hands. Well, anyway, let's go back in time, get some geographical context. This shows the Reading Railroad 1917 and all of the spur routes that go off of it, leased lines, owned lines, etc. And you can see it goes from Philadelphia over to Lurgan as you go east to west, and it goes all the way from, Wilmington, Delaware, up to the New York border in extent. A good place to start with history is the birth certificate, and that would be the charter for the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad. Took 73 pages to write that charter. It's impressive. Instead of using the charter, I decided I'd use this brief history of the Reading system written by J.V. Hare, Secretary and Treasurer, A Century of the Reading Company Motive Power. And as you would expect, this book is rather technically oriented. It doesn't have like social features and baseball teams and all that sort of stuff that we might be interested in. So on April 4th, 1833, the Reading Company was chartered. It was chartered as the Reading Railroad with lowercase rail and lowercase road and hyphen in there. It was later changed to Railroad. The Philadelphia and Reading changed their name frequently during its existence, and that makes it a little bit insane to do searching for it because you have to go in on all these elements. When did it open? Well, it opened in segments, so that's hard to say. And they kept buying segments and adding segments, deleting segments all the time. The objective was to get up to Pottsville from Philadelphia. And so here we have in 1842, you were able to get to Port Clinton. You could go from Port Clinton into Pottsville, I understand, by the little Schuylkill navigation railroad up there. That was actually a service railroad to Lehigh system. For $50, you could be an owner of this enterprise. And so here's your value. Now, the thing that I really like about these is the fact that the graphics are so interesting. You know, the rest of it's fine, but letterheads from this period and certificates from this period are really interesting and fun to use. Probably the most famous engine on the Reading, and this was in the collection, this photograph, was the Rocket, 1838. It was in service for like 43 years and did 310,000 miles of service. One of the Reading's first locomotives delivered to the port of Richmond, March of 1838. And you can see that it was carried by a canal boat up to Front and Penn Streets. Front and Penn Street, for me, is a rather important location, having worked on the railroad there and having worked at RAC down at Front and Penn. When the Rocket retired, it went on tour. And so we find it in Chicago for the Columbian Exposition in 1893, the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904, and the Fair of the Iron Horse outside of Baltimore at that time. First scheduled run, well, May 1st, 1838. The engine was an Eversink, a Baldwin locomotive. Baldwin opened up a factory down in Philadelphia that really produced lots of locomotives. Reading to Philadelphia service started December 5th, 1839, with the engine Gowan and Marks, shown here, being the starting engine, let's put it that way. So, it is stated in a report of the engineers to the Board of Managers that the company's engine, the Gowan and Marks, on that day, December 5th, left Reading with a train of 80 cars. Now, that little thing with 80 cars, that's impressive. It conveyed 1,635 barrels of flour, 73¼ tons of blooms, 6 tons of coal, and 2 hogsheads of whiskey, along with 60 people. It took 9 hours for the trip. Between Reading and Pottsville, one of the water pipes broke, and that's probably why this section isn't covered in the mechanical section of the history that J.B. Hare provided. At several points along, it had to be assisted. After a run of 9 hours, the train arrived in Philadelphia, where it got a great ovation. It was really a great ovation. They fired off cannons. They had hundreds and hundreds of people in the street. The church bells rang. It was a huge event in Philadelphia when this train arrived. And I'm sure the people who were on it were relieved as well. During the Civil War, as we fast forward a little bit, 20 years or so, we find that Civil War relied heavily on railroads for logistics, for bulk products like coal, and found that there were possibilities of confiscation. Well, let's move on to this one, shall we? George Cadwalader, who was Major General, U.S. Army, working under orders from President Lincoln, sent a letter to Charles Smith telling him that the Reading Railroad and its branches were seized for military service of the United States. Now, they did this rather gently. Lincoln could have come up with a lot of muscle and troops and, all that stuff, but instead he sent some machinists with wrenches and guys who were ready to work. And the railroaders understood that. What they were looking for was a higher compensation for a more dangerous job that they were doing. They were on a hurry up schedule that was starting to show in the hospitals with amputees and the like. So they wanted that extra 50 cents, and that enabled things to settle down and get started. Mild affair. It's the largest corporation in the world twice, 1871 and 1920. It's capitalized corporation. In 1893, there was a reorganization, and that resulted in a name change. It went from Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, PNRR, to Philadelphia and Reading Railway, PNRR. Not a big change, but still, if you're searching, road is different from way, so you got to be aware. Then in 1923, it faced a monopoly judgment and had to divest in its coal mines, coal holdings, because they were out of control the way they were treating the independent miners up in coal regions up around Summit Hill and beyond that. They changed their name at that time to the Reading Railroad. That'll do with the name change until it gets to Conrail. So now we have an official Reading Railroad on the monopoly board. Daddy Big Bucks is making more money off of this thing than we can throw at him. And the years were good for a while. But on April Fool's Day, 1976, the Reading Railroad faded out of view, along with 6 other Eastern railroads, creating the Consolidated Rail Corporation. It was first known as Conrail, and then it became known as Conrail. So we have more name changes. So from April 4th, 1833 until April 1st, 1976, there's lots of railroad history here. That is a books that you can do. Literally, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of books on the Reading, and magazine articles and all kinds of materials. 143 years of the Reading Railroad. Now I have family history with the railroad, as was mentioned at the onset, and I'm very fortunate to have family here. This is like Father's Day. It's wonderful. So my connection to railroading in this collection, the family would take excursions to Philadelphia for holidays. This is the only color photograph that was in the collection, and it was like it was on somebody's desk, and they just threw it in the bin with the rest of the photographs. So that's the sole one. So we would go on these excursions, rambles, over to Hershey Park for safety rallies at the Reading Company Y, and I had a lot of family working on the railroad. Oh, the excursion. How many took the trip to Philadelphia to Wanamaker's? Anybody take that? Yeah, you remember that? Okay. You might remember Horn and Hordart, right adjacent to the station. And for a couple of coins, you could get yourself a real good meal. Then you cross the street and meet up at the Eagle. That was on the first floor of Wanamaker's, and enjoy their Christmas show. Now I have a couple seconds of it for you. So this is the Macy's version of the Christmas shows. Luckily, I found the Locomotive in there, so I could justify having this in the presentation. There's a Locomotive, so okay. Well, there's Santa trains that are existent today. That's my wife, Shelley. Down at Colebrookdale with our Christmas run. Beautiful territory.
Actually, at this point, it looks like it's Santa Claus. I don't know what he's doing out there in the field, but we're going to stop and talk to him.
There he is. Whoops. Something's not right. Well, we'll move on, but that should have had some additional slides. Well, we'd also take excursions and trips to other railroad sites like down in New Freedom, where there's this Northern Central Railroad down there that you can ride. There's the museum, Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania over in Strasburg. There's a really nice museum in Hamburg for the Reading Railroad Heritage Museum. My grandson, Matthias, who's over here, was the fellow sitting in that chair. He's grown up a little bit, as you can see from this. When his family, there's Alicia, Jeff, Matthias, and Gabe's a friend, they took one of the Reading, Blue Mountain, and Northern excursions up from Jim's Thorpe. Very nice trips. So there are pieces of the Reading still around. We saw Colebrookdale. We've seen now, the excursions up the line. There's other pieces that are working. Now, my family's been working on the railroad. My mother's side, well, my great-grandfather James worked for the car shop in St. Clair. Unfortunately, he was mortally injured while hopping on a freight. He was actually hopping on an engine to get home from work. Lived in Palo Alto, and that was 1916. On my father's side, including him, my great-grandfather Patrick Lawlor, notice it's ER there, and we changed the name too to OR. He was a brakeman on the PNRR working out of New Philadelphia. And unfortunately, he too was injured on the job at Mine Hill Crossing. They kind of wondered why any more Lawlors would want to become railroaders. Not a good track record. That was 1892 for Patrick. For my grandfathers on the railroad, this is actually from the collection, what you're looking at there, the PNRR locomotive called the Pennsylvania. And so what I did was one of my grandfathers worked for the PNRR, the other worked for the Pennsylvania, made for interesting chatter at holiday meals. So Andrew worked for them, Robert worked for them. On my mother's side, there's my Uncle Ed, who worked for the railroad. Well, he worked in the paint shop in the railroad for one day. I'm counting it. He's in the group. On my father's side, I had two uncles, Bill and Paul. Paul was general foreman. Bill was clerical in the motive power and rolling equipment sector of the railroad. And then I worked for the railroad for 11 years, 6 of them on the Reading and 5 of them on Conrail. Sounds like my uncles. There were 3 kids on the excursion train that would sing this all the way from Phoenixville to Pottstown. Me and my 2 sisters. People prayed for us to get away. It's a real old recording. If you hear the thumping in some of these recordings, it's because they were digitized off of wax cylinders. And that's what gives you that boom, 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 goes on. It's not percussion. So what did I do? I was a machinist helper in the Reading Locomotive shop for 3 summers. Sort of fudged the age for the first one. Winter break, 1970 in the powerhouse. And then from 70 to 81, I was clerical, working mostly at the inspection pit in Reading, which is real close to the coal dock, and you'll see that a little bit later. And of course, down at Front and Penn. doing computer work down there and learning all about computers as much as I could pull in, because I could see that this was the future. But I wondered when I saw crews in front of their engines or in front of a roundhouse, whether any of those crewmen in the collection was one of my relatives. I didn't know. All worked at the roundhouse area. And my grandfather Townsend, he and I worked down at Penn Street. The imprint of the railroad on Reading was impressive. This is the 1874 passenger depot that opened on August 3rd. It was called the Upper Passenger Depot. They still had one down at 7th and Chestnut in Reading. That eventually will close and reopen and take time till it settles down what the transit's going to be in the Reading area. The merchants on Penn Street were very upset that this was moved. The station was moved because they always wanted people to come shop in their stores. And that wasn't real convenient from Moley Street like it was from Chestnut. Now we're at a point where we're going to create the collection. Photographs in the collection were taken by railroad photographers. I do not know who they are. I checked the ledger books about 2 weeks ago, and all the locomotives and photographs are listed in there, but no photographers. So, impressive shop. No finer shop in the entire country than the Reading Company's new locomotive plant, putting in some of the machinery. That was the Reading Eagle, 13th of April, 1901. Then it's reported that men at the locomotive shop, everybody included, averaged nearly $60 a month, 24 to 25 cents an hour. Not bad when you think about what textile workers were making at the same time, which was under 10 cents. So the railroad photographers worked for the superintendent of motive power and rolling equipment. This is the most I have of them is the silhouette at the bottom of the screen as they're taking a photograph there. So I know who they are. They're right there. There's a little bit of irony with this screen. That's a diesel engine in front of the coal dock. But I talked to a guy up at Hamburg, and he said, well, you know, they use the coal dock to put sand in too, so that they could, you know, put abrasion down on the rails to get traction. Aerial view of the shops. Locomotive shop on the right there. And there's one of the photographs taken in front of the Loki shop. And car shop, the car shop would have rolling equipment. There's a bit of rolling equipment in there. This baggage car that Reading was particularly proud of. They had several copies of it in the envelope. There's the coal dock with an engine in front of it. Another coal dock engine. And finally, the roundhouse, and we've already seen some from that. So, April 1st, 76, that should be ingrained by now. The locomotive shop closed, and the Reading Eagle reported it, page like 2 or 3. It's not even front page. And that led to the acquisition of the collection, the actual putting those negatives in a big bin and rescuing them. Conrail trashed the photographic lab. Conrail trashed most of the files that were there. In fact, up at the museum in Hamburg, they say, well, an awful lot of their stuff was taken by dumpster diving like my dad did. Okay, now, This is a reenactment, all right? This is not my dad. I can tell you why. There's two clues. He never wore jeans and he never wore sneakers. So I know right away it's not him, but you get the drift. And there's kind of what it looked like. It was just in a big bin, all scattered. It was in the envelope separated. It was kind of sad shape. So I had to sort the thing first. Most had a negative, either a film or a glass negative. Some had a print, but not too many. There were diagrams and drawings and documents in the bin as well. This was one of them. It was actually quite a small little booklet. But you can see that it's actually a useful document. It's also useful if you're a modeler, because you can make a model based on it and get perfect scale for a model. Oh, here are the preservation steps. That's part one of what you came for. Sort by envelope number, create an inventory of all the equipment. That's the inventory there. And the inventory is linked to the engine in the database. So I can click on that and bring that up. The process was to get the negative out of the envelope and try to figure out what it was. Sometimes you could read them, sometimes you couldn't. Then they went for scanning. Both a print or a negative went for scanning. I could do the prints, but I had to take the negatives to Northlight Photography at the Fairground Square Mall if you're ever interested in getting photographs restored. Wow, that guy is good. Jim Freeman up there.
Is he still there?
Yeah, just Wednesdays. Just Wednesdays when it's open, but he's still there, yeah. So you create the digital with the scan, put that in a database. Then you go and make a print. So that for every locomotive, I have a negative, usually, and a print. That way you can use the reference print instead of pulling out the negative. You can leave your hands off the negative. And then only use it if you really need to use the negative for some purpose. You take all those, the print negatives, you put them in these acid-free, lignin-free envelopes. You store that in a cool place. Now, I put lignin-free up there. Lignin-free is, the lignin is a plant-based polymer that is typically used in making envelopes. Saying that, I have no idea what that means, but it's something that you didn't want to have touching your negatives. It was lignin. Store it in a cool place because, as you know, the negatives, the films are very combustible. And then finally, we put some out in the web as this work was proceeding. For a bit of a summary, we have on the screen a sort of spreadsheet. There were 212 steam engines, 32 named, and 180 of them were numbered, 65 diesels, and 5 miscellaneous, for a total of 282 total engines. The more interesting thing on the screen are the miscellaneous items. Well, they were to me. The Crusader engine, 116, which was the Art Deco streamliner, and the tugboats. I was fascinated by the tugboats. They used tugs to haul coal around New York City, Providence, up to Boston from Port Reading. Some of the images needed fixing. As you can see in the upper left corner, you can see there's some damage there, and there's also a little damage elsewhere. Oh, there's nothing wrong with these guys. We can leave them alone. But we can fix up some of this damage up there. A little bit of work in Photoshop or one of those tools. And here it is, kind of restored. These were a little more difficult to restore. This was the result of a scan of a broken negative. This was a scan of a broken negative that had part of the information missing on the lower left-hand corner here. And Jim Friedman figured this out. He's the one who went in and drew what he figured would be there, what was missing. And it comes out like that. It's really good. Now I took care of this one. The right-hand corner is cracked off, and we have 3 parts to it. Very risky to scan the glass. You can really wreck a scanner. And that's fixed. So we got those back in the pack, and they're ready to go. While I was doing all that, every week I was taking materials out to the photographer. I created a social media item. I didn't get very many people because I didn't solicit much. I wanted some people who knew about the railroading, who could advise me on things. And I got some real wonderful people who did just that. Told me what was what and how they worked and where the location was. Really very, very helpful. So this is a website that I put up. Priority for the posts were locomotives with crews. That was my #1 priority. Remember, I'm looking for family. Locomotives with a background, an interesting background. Landmarks, documents, clippings, diagrams, etc. Oh, here's one of the photographs. It does not have a crew. This is actually 2 photographs. It's not they're not photoshopped in. It's the only one that I have a duplicate like that in the whole collection. And there they are. I blew them up a little bit so you could see them. And there's this one. Oh, I really like this. The lanterns lined up on the rail. And then I don't know what this guy is dressed for. I never went to work like that on the railroad, so I don't know if they had a special store or what. But it's interesting. It's an interesting look. I thought he might have been my grandfather because his face came up rather high on the photo analysis stuff. It came up like 43% chance, which is relatively high for facial recognition. I also like the Kosciuszko. It has a nice background to it with trees and houses, and in the foreground you have some railroad, the little walkway there and all. It's very nice. Plus, it's fun to say, Kosciuszko. He was a Polish volunteer in the American Revolution, worked as a colonel under Washington, and was responsible for laying out the defenses of West Point. Well, background, trestle with cars. That's fun. And then a couple roundhouses at the north end of the shop. Pretty old photograph. I've seen this one online elsewhere, but the original negative's in the collection. It's a trainscape. But I think the most significant collection in here, and everybody gee whizzes about, is this Art Deco train. In the 1930s, railroading became an art form with this. Almost all the railroads put together one of these streamliners. And so the Reading was part of that movement, put together a streamliner. Streamliners were even remembered in Agatha Christie's Perot on PBS, as the opening animation goes as this. It's so aces, you'll blow your wig. Well, perhaps not. Well, you go, how did passenger travel go from this? Here's a Lancaster Intelligencer newspaper from 1834, People's Daily Line. And it looks like a smoking car that you're riding in. So how did it go from this splendid line of passenger cars to this? Well, the conversion is interesting. They converted an old steam engine. You can see it's 1937 was when the work was done in the Reading shop at 6th and Perry. If you look real closely at these photographs as they go by, you can sometimes see machinists, boilermakers, pipe fitters, others in the shop working on the locomotive. There's a fellow on the left there. Fellow up top. And on the cab roof. All over on the side over there. Look. Got a bunch up top. Frame on it. The interior of the cab, and that's what you get when you're done. The 117 was the twin engine to the 118 that you just saw being built. It was decommissioned and they turned it back into regular Pacific engine. Now we'll take a look at one of the coaches. These were interesting. Mostly built at bud shops in Philadelphia, the upholstery was done in the upholstery shops in Reading, along with some of the appointments. Now, I understand that's true. You know, I haven't found any documentation for it.
All aboard!
Well, we close the door. Comfortable looking. The galley in the dining car. The menu. You can get a copy of this either from the website for the project or from New York Public Library's digital system available there. Some of the prices are pretty good. It was auto on that screen. It said no aspirin could be sold in New Jersey. You'd think that's the very place you would need aspirin. And so you take an old engine and cover on it, and there you are. There's the streamliner. Well, there was other motive power that the railroad had besides locomotives. There were inspection cars, there was a Holmes crane, and there were the tugboats that I mentioned earlier. So let's take a look. Inspection cars included the Black Diamond, which was a rather famous one. Some museum in St. Louis, I think, has this. These cars were used by like high up management to go to station openings and things like that. And it was used when not assigned for inspection of trackage. There's a record that says they actually hauled 80-car train with one of these things. I can't believe it. There's your inspection car. Here's the Holmes crane that was being received by this company employee in 1974. And upon further investigation, that's my dad. So there he is. I found a relative in the collection. For the tugboats, you have the tug Tamako in front of the Statue of Liberty. That's a nice photograph. Henry Jackson, one of the most important photographers of the 19th century, took a photograph of the view from the Philadelphia and Reading Railway Station. This is right off of in Jersey. Library of Congress prints and photographs. So that's not in my collection. It's from them. You can see where they traveled in that area around the Sound and up through East River and so forth. I really like this one. Just the name, Patience, for a tugboat. It's perfect. Patient. Nudge it along. So I did some research on them. Well, I didn't really do research. I did some lookup online to see what was cooking with this thing and found out that, well, you know, there's several more in the fleet. At one time, the fleet was 21 tugboats, and ownership of the tugs seemed to change very frequently. Like one time you'd see it owned by this company, then it'd be back with the Reading Railroad, then it'd be owned by another company or leased out to another company. Tough to tell. But it wasn't just there for hauling barges around, although that was its purpose. Patience was involved in a lot of rescues. Rescued 3 fishermen from Atlantic City who were adrift in a disabled boat. Before that, it had done several rescues. But the big one was January 2nd, 1935, when the freighter Jane Christensen collided with the steamer Lexington in the East River. It says 150 were saved, 4 missing in the East River crash. A Brooklyn newspaper says, no, there were 178 saved and 4. So we have a discrepancy here, and history doesn't like that. So I'll have to try to figure out how there was overcount or undercount or both for these newspaper articles. They differ in other ways too. Shows a map of where the collision took place. And now this is a little bit surreal. It's the day after New Year's. The temperature is about 30 degrees out. The water is very cold. It's dark. Your ship has been rammed by a freighter, and it's going down. The orchestra plays on, knee-deep in water that swirled over the main lounge. The ship's orchestra blared, "Somebody stole my gal," while 9 Negro stewards stuck to the vessel to help the last passengers onto the tugs. The New York Daily News, however, reported that the men of the Lexington worked with perfect discipline in clearing the boat. Well, that jives up with the first article. It sank in 10 minutes. The first article didn't say anything about how long it sank. The ship's orchestra struck up a jazz time offering of "Linger a While." Now think about that. You're trying to evacuate a ship and you're playing a song, Linger a While. I don't think that was the idea. Are these songs very similar, that somebody could hear one and mistake it for the other? Oh yeah, you're gonna hear it.
Somebody stole my girl, somebody stole my pal, somebody came and took her away. She didn't even say she was leaving the kiss that I love so. He's getting now, I know, and I know that she would come to me if she could see a broken-hearted, lonesome pal. Somebody stole my girl.
Well, that would make me get off the boat fast. But let's see what Linger a While sounds like. Music is all public domain from the Cylinder Reservation at UC Santa Barbara. Might be the neighbors downstairs banging on the floor. I'm not sure. Wow, the tug Patience, following the stern of the Lexington, threw over a rickety gangplank to the tilting deck of the Lexington and took aboard 93 persons. The tug Diamond S rescued 12, the John Rube 47, and the Elmira took in 4, according to the Bismarck Tribune. There was one piece of equipment that was not powered by motor, but I decided to include it anyway. I don't know what you had to do wrong to get this job on the velocipede, but it was for track repairs, go out and test the tracks, make sure they're safe. Well, the last passenger train left the station on March 16th, 1969. That's page 16 of the Reading Eagle. They had this cartoon, Elegant Railroad Era Ends as the last train leaves the outer station. It was only 31 years since the Reading built that Crusader. In another 7 years, the whole railroad would cease to be.
Train on my mind. Now that just means I'm gonna ease on down the line. 'Cause I believe in working, but I don't find time. I've got the railroad blues, but I haven't got no railroad fare. Ain't got nowhere to go, nobody waiting for me there. I'll get an arm full of freight trains as sure as I'm born. Ride so far you think I'm dead and gone. Got the railroad blues, but I haven't got no railroad fare.
Of course, that one wound up on a t-shirt. It's gone. So, that's a photograph with 22 crewmen on it. Somewhere there's a piece of paper that has their names. It's not on the back of the photograph because the photograph is only a negative, so it's not scrolled on the back of that, and they didn't include anything else. We know where it's from down Coatesville, but we're not sure of anything else about it. So what's the status of the collection right now? Well, all the locomotives that have been identified have been safely stored in those plastic boxes inside of envelopes. The database has been done and is available. In fact, I sent a copy of that to Rick Bates at the Hamburg Railroad Museum. Made a coffee cup of tugboat. Never guess which one. Patience. Okay. Thankfully, the preservation and digitization helps slow the fading memories. So I think at this point, we can let the musical talents of one Isaiah W. Gogler, who wrote the Railroad Polka in 1952. Publisher was J.E. Gould. And, feel free to polka. I thank you very much for your attention. Okay. We will entertain questions, and then we'll find somebody to answer them.